So a viewer named Shane left a comment on our Project Agora video. And honestly, it was a better question than the video. He said, hang on, central banks don't have their own rails. Somebody private has to be providing the actual technology here. And he had a guess. He thought it might be Ripple. And I told him, on camera, that I wasn't going to assert anything until I'd verified it. So I did the boring thing. I downloaded the full 97-page report the BIS published, and I read it to the end. And look, the answer's in there. It's on page 33, in a section almost everybody skipped, and it is not what anyone guessed. The rails underneath 8 of the most powerful central banks on Earth are open source software. Ethereum-compatible code you could download this afternoon for free. And the company that actually built it, the BIS never names them, not once in 97 pages. So first, what's a rail? A rail is just the plumbing. It's the thing that actually moves the money. And here's the distinction that matters. Most of what you think of as moving money is really just moving a message. A wire transfer is, at heart, an instruction. One bank telling another, hey, please pay this person. A rail is the thing that does the actual moving. So was Shane right that central banks don't build these themselves? Yeah, he was. And I want to give you the receipt because this is the part people assume rather than check. Take the Bank of England. They spent years rebuilding the system that settles nearly every pound in Britain. It moves something like 790 billion pounds on an average day. Did they write it themselves? No. They ran a public procurement, and in 2020, they hired Accenture to design and build the core settlement engine and the core ledger. The bank said the contract was worth up to 150 million pounds. And here's what you only find if you open the audit. The National Audit Office later published what Accenture was actually paid. 143 million plus 12 million more for extra work. So about 155 million, slightly over the cap they'd announced. The new system went live in April of 2025. And Accenture isn't a one-off. You find the same handful of firms turning up across central bank projects for years. Central banks are policy institutions. They are not software houses. So, page 33. Here's what it says, and I'm reading it straight. Each participant interacts with the Project Agora platform through permissioned distributed ledger nodes running Hyperledger Besu, an enterprise-grade, Ethereum-compatible blockchain client. That's the rail. That's the answer. So what's Besu if you're hearing that name for the first time? Think of it as software that lets you run a private network using Ethereum's engine. It's open source. It lives under the Linux Foundation. Nobody sells it to you. You go to the documentation and you download it. And that's the genuinely surprising part. We imagine that when central banks build at this scale, there's some bespoke system behind a very expensive door. Instead, the BIS glossary just says it. Hyperledger Besu, an open source, enterprise-grade Ethereum client. Now, how does it agree on anything? It uses something called QBFT under what's known as proof of authority. In plain English, the validators, the machines that confirm transactions, are pre-approved named institutions. You don't buy your way in. And the report is blunt. Validator membership is determined off-chain and does not rely on token-based incentives or open participation. So let me be as clear as I can. There is no token here, no mining, no staking, nothing to buy. And here's a detail that matters later, so hang on to it. It isn't actually one ledger. Everyone says unified ledger, but when they built it, it came out as 2 layers. One shared ledger where the tokenized deposits live, and then a separate ledger for each currency area, sitting under that country's own central bank. They call those jurisdictional ledgers, and each central bank keeps control of its own. So the single grand ledger, engineered honestly, turned into several. And one more thing I love, there's no bridge anywhere in it. None. The interoperability comes from running the same execution model on every ledger. For a document written by central bankers, that's a quietly devastating note on how most of crypto does interoperability today. All right, Shane, this one's for you, and I want to do it properly. The BIS publishes a list, a public 2-page PDF naming every private institution in Project Agora. I pulled it and counted it line by line, 43 firms. And on the public side, 7 central banks actually built the prototype. The Bank of Canada joined at the end of May, which is how you get to 8. And it's a serious list. JP Morgan, HSBC, Citi, Deutsche Bank, UBS, Santander, Standard Chartered, the big Japanese and Korean banks, Euroclear, and then Visa, MasterCard, and Swift, all sitting together. Ripple is not on it. And I didn't just eyeball that. I searched the entire 97-page report for Ripple, XRP, and Interledger. Zero hits, all three. Then I checked Ripple's own newsroom, because we've learned the hard way that companies announce things on their own site that search engines never surface. Nothing. Ripple has never claimed to be part of this. So the honest answer is no. And notably, nobody at Ripple ever said otherwise. But here's what I think actually happened, and this is the useful bit. There's a name on that list that reads SBI Shinsei Bank. And SBI is a name a lot of people associate with Ripple because of a separate and very real partnership. So some coverage rounded SBI Shinsei Bank off to SBI Holdings. And once that's out there, it just travels. Different company, same three letters. So Shane, you weren't being sloppy. You were reasoning from what was in circulation, and the thing in circulation had a name swapped inside it. That's an information hygiene problem, and it's exactly why I went and read the primary document. And look, none of this is a knock on Ripple. They've got real institutional work. It's just a different set of projects than this one. Okay, but hold on. Open source software doesn't install itself. Somebody had to design this, build it, test it, deploy it. So who? And this is where I went round in circles, because the BIS report never says. I searched all 97 pages for anything resembling a contractor or a technology partner. Nothing. No acknowledgement section, no vendor named, no supplier credited anywhere. So I came at it from the other end. If you built the payments rail for 8 central banks, you'd probably mention it on your own website, right? And there it was. A company called Kaleido. On their own site, in plain language, Kaleido is the technology vendor for Project Agora. And then this. The IIF has engaged Kaleido to provide the technology services to design, develop, test, and deploy the Agora prototype. The IIF being the Institute of International Finance, the body that convened all the private banks. Now, I want to be careful here because precision is the whole point of this channel. That is Kaleido's own statement about Kaleido. It's a first-party claim. The BIS has not confirmed it because the BIS doesn't name vendors at all. So what makes it credible isn't that they said it. It's that the BIS report independently describes a stack that turns out to be Kaleido's own open source work. The privacy layer in Agora is a framework called Paladin, and Paladin is a Linux Foundation project that originated at Kaleido. The vendor's claim and the BIS's technical description fit together like two halves of one sentence, without either side pointing at the other. And Kaleido has a lineage you might not expect. They were launched inside Consensus, Joe Lubin's company, Lubin being one of Ethereum's co-founders, back in 2018, and spun out independent in 2020. So follow the thread all the way down and you get something wonderful. The rails carrying tokenized central bank money trace back through open source code to the Ethereum world. And one detail from that privacy layer I can't stop thinking about. When two institutions need to run something confidentially, each spins up a tiny temporary Ethereum machine on its own infrastructure, runs the private logic inside it, signs the result, and then throws the machine away. Only a cryptographic commitment ever touches the shared ledger, proof it happened, without the details. They call it an ephemeral EVM, a whole computer created and destroyed for one step of one payment. Now, our last video went out at the end of May, so I went looking for what's moved since. And from the BIS itself, genuinely nothing. The project page still says updated 27th of May. But the biggest development didn't come from Basel at all. It came from Portugal. On the 1st of July, at the European Central Bank's forum in Sintra, Shin gave a paper. And you need to know who that is. Shin is the economist who came up with the unified ledger concept in the first place, when he was head of research at the BIS. He is now governor of the Bank of Korea, which is one of Agora's own central banks. So the man who drew the blueprint now runs one of the institutions using it. And he says two things that matter enormously here. First, Korea's been running its own version, called Project Hangang, and it isn't a prototype. He says they've done live retail transactions with around 80,000 real users, using tokenized deposits settled in tokenized central bank money. Second, and this is the bit that made me sit up, Korea wants to plug Hangang into Agora as Korea's own jurisdictional ledger, and he says that should be easier because, his words, both systems use the same underlying technology, Hyperledger Besu. So that's a sitting central bank governor in an ECB paper independently confirming exactly what I found on page 33. Two separate primary sources saying the same thing. But he also hands us the honest complication, and I love that it comes from an insider rather than a critic. He says the technical linkage is only part of the task. What Agora still needs is a common rulebook across every participating country. Who can join, what settlement finality legally means, risk, compliance, data protection, and then agreeing that across all the jurisdictions is a challenging undertaking and one that technical experiments alone cannot deliver. And there's one more thing from this window you need, because if you've seen the headline, you're already wondering about it. On the 9th of July, Swift, and remember, Swift is itself an Agora participant, announced that its own blockchain shared ledger is, in their words, ready for initial use, with 17 banks lining up to pilot tokenized deposits for cross-border payments. And some of those banks, Citi, HSBC, UBS, are sitting inside Agora too. Now I want to be careful because this is where coverage goes sloppy. Swift's announcement never mentions Agora, not once. These are two separate efforts with overlapping membership, running in parallel. So this is not Agora going live, and anyone telling you it is hasn't read either release. And note the wording. Ready for initial use is not the same as live. The banks are preparing to test. And the BIS is equally straight about the limits. This prototype was never performance tested. No throughput benchmarking, no latency measurement, no stress testing. They say so explicitly, deliberately out of scope. It was never connected to a real settlement system. So if somebody quotes you a transactions per second number for Agora, it doesn't exist. Nobody measured one. So let's bring it home. Shane asked who provides Agora's rails, and here's the answer. He was right that central banks don't build their own. The Bank of England hired Accenture for exactly this kind of work. He was wrong about Ripple, but for a completely understandable reason, because a bank's name got swapped somewhere upstream. And the real answer is more interesting than either option. The rails are Hyperledger Besu, open source, Ethereum compatible, with named validators and no token anywhere in it. The build was done by Kaleido, a company out of the Ethereum world that the BIS itself never names. So what do you do with that? 3 things, all free. 1. Go read the primary source. The BIS report is a public PDF, and the technical chapter is genuinely readable. Page 33 is where the rail is named. 2. If you're technical, the code is right there. Besu's documentation is public. Paladin is Apache licensed on GitHub. The plumbing behind 8 central banks is not behind a paywall. And 3. Watch for the rulebook. Governor Shin just told us the unsolved problem is legal, not technical. Getting every country to agree on what settlement finality means. So when you see a common rulebook being drafted, or real value testing getting a start date, that's the signal this is becoming real. A press release about the tech isn't the milestone. The rulebook is. And look, this video exists because one person in the comments pushed back and asked a sharper question than I'd answered. So Shane, thank you. Genuinely. That's the best version of this channel. If you've got a question like that, something you think we glossed over, or a project you want taken apart properly, put it in the comments. I read them, and sometimes they become the next video, like this one did. Every source is linked in the description. Subscribe if you want more of this, and I'll see you in the next one.